my name is Dano, and welcome to Rule Your Sound, the place for songwriters, producers, and music lovers to learn tips and tricks from today's top artists so we can build out our library of ideas and help take our own music and our own sound to the next level. I am so excited to share today's video with you. Today we're going to go over Mood by 24KGOLDN featuring Iann Dior, and in 2020 this song was #1 on the Hot 100 Billboard chart for 6 weeks, so there's certainly a lot that we can learn. So without further ado, let's just dive right in. The first thing we can learn from this song is to have a build-up intro. I am a sucker for build-up intros, and in this song, 24KGOLDN and Iann Dior keep adding layers until my heart is full and happy. So I absolutely love the way that they started this song. It starts off with some guitars and some distant vocals in the background, and then the melody comes in with some hi-hats and some claps, and then we got melody dubs, some full harmonies, along with some drum and bass to round it all out. Let's take a listen. For the first layer, we just have guitars. Then they added in some background vocals. Then we got the lead vocal with some hi-hats and claps.
Why you always in the mood? Fuck around like I'm brand new.
Then for the last layer, we've got a kick, we've got a bass, we've got some dubs on the vocals, some vocal harmonies. We got it all.
Why you always in the mood? Fuck around like I'm brand new.
This is a great way to have some variation in your song, which is really important so that the song doesn't feel repetitive for your listeners. And the key word here is feel, that it feels repetitive. Because this song, for example, the chorus is repeated 6 times. So using repetition in your songs is great. It's a great way for people to start to memorize the lyrics so that they can sing along, but it can't feel repetitive for your listeners, and that's something that's really important. And something that you can do is if you want to repeat a section, a way that you can avoid having it feel repetitive is by changing it up every single time. So by doing this build up in the intro, what it's doing is getting your listener familiar with the chorus, so that when it comes later in the song, it already feels familiar. We already feel like we know the words, but at the same time, it feels like we haven't heard this before. So great job to the songwriters and production team for this build up intro. I think it's a really fantastic way to start a song and a great way to kind of prime your listeners to that chorus while giving some variation so it doesn't end up feeling repetitive. Number 2, there is contrast between the intro and the first verse. So you know that I talk about contrast in basically every single video because I think it is such a key element to having a song that sounds good for your listeners and that takes them on a journey from beginning to end without it feeling boring. Let's listen to how contrast is used between the intro and the first verse.
Everything look better with a view. I can never get attached. When I start to feel I'm attached.
So what I love about this is after that build up, we get immediately pulled back into the vibe that we had right at the beginning of the intro, where we really only had the melody plus the hi-hat and some claps. This sudden drop creates a point of interest for your listeners, and we actually talked about this in depth in this video on Billie Eilish, so if you haven't seen that one, I highly recommend that you check it out. But I think that even if 24KGOLDN kept that energy high at the same level, it would technically sound good, but it wouldn't take your listeners on that up and down journey and creating those points of interest for them in the song. So even though it could technically sound good on its own, it could become boring if you don't put that contrast in your song. And I know that in the first point we talked about variation, and that happens again because after this verse, when we go back into the chorus, now a riser element is added, so it elevates us even higher than we were before at any point in the song. So just a reminder, if you are copying and pasting your choruses, you're doing something wrong. Don't do that. Your listeners are going to end up being bored as fuck. So make sure that there is variation between every single part of your song. Number 3 is to have variation in your lyric stresses. We talked in depth about stresses in your words and your lyrics in this video. So if you haven't seen it, definitely check it out. But what I really hope that you can take away from today's video is that anytime that you set up a pattern for your listeners, they're going to get used to that pattern and they're going to be ready for it. So when you change that pattern, whatever it is that you set, it will create a point of interest for your listener. So in the lyrics in Mood, they set up a feel that the stresses are 3-4-4, and that's repeated several times throughout the song. So let me give you an example so you can see what I mean. All right, so the lyrics go like this. Why you always in a mood, fucking round, acting brand new. I ain't trying to tell you what to do, but try to play it cool. Baby, I ain't playing by your rules. Everything look better with a view. And then even when we get into the verse, we keep that 3-4-4 pattern. I could never get attached. When I start to feel I unattached, somehow always end up feeling bad. Baby, I am not your dad. It's not all you want from me. I just want your company. So do you hear that we as listeners are getting used to that 3-4-4 stressed syllable pattern? And so in the second half of this first verse, they actually change up that stress pattern so that it's 4-4-4-4. And on top of that, not only do they change up the stress pattern, so it's 4-4-4-4, they added a line. So throughout the whole song, it's been sets of 3 lines. And now finally at the end of the verse, we're getting 4 lines. Girl, it's obvious, elephant in the room, and we're part of it. Don't act so confused. And you love starting it. Now I'm in a mood. Now we arguing in my bedroom. So I know it's so simple and it's also so subtle. It's not something that most listeners will really be consciously thinking about when they're listening to your song, but they will feel that difference in the stressed syllables. And that's going to help keep your song interesting throughout the beginning to the end. All right, for number 4, the second verse is also the bridge. So sometimes I found myself stuck in second verse hell where I'm not sure exactly what to do. And same thing with a bridge, where I personally love when songs have bridges. They don't need to, but it's a great way to create some variation in your song. And sometimes I personally find myself stuck on a bridge. I'm not really sure what to do with it. And something that you can try is just have the function of your second verse be the same function of your bridge. So instead of writing a whole different section for your bridge, just think of it as doing a variation on the verse. So in this case, 24KGOLDN changed up the melody in the second verse. He also gave the song some more energy than the first verse, so there's variation in that respect as well. So let's take a quick listen from the difference between the first verse and the second verse so you can see what I mean. Here's the first verse.
I can never get attached. When I start to feel I unattached, somehow I was in a feeling bad.
And here's the second verse.
So why you trying to pay your love on the regular when you could be blowing up just like cellular?
So obviously 24KGOLDN, Iann Dior, and team elevated the energy in that second verse. It's so different from the first verse that it almost feels like it's a bridge section, and it actually keeps that same function as a bridge. I've heard a lot of times artists will actually use this opportunity to pull the energy back. So it really doesn't matter what you're doing as long as you're creating some variation or contrast that helps convey the emotional response that you are hoping to get out of your listeners. So while we're talking about the second verse / bridge, another great thing about this song is having contrast in the vocal rhythm in this section. So what I love about the vocal rhythm in this section is that the first half has a swung feel and the second half has a straight feel. If you're not familiar with swung versus straight rhythm, basically swung is something that you can skip along to. Da, 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 where straight is completely even spaces between the notes. Da, 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 da. So it's easy right away to feel the emotional difference that those two rhythms have. The swung is more free, more relaxed, whereas the straight is a little more definitive and defined. All right, so let's take a listen to how the rhythm is swung at first and then how it changes to have a straight feel.
So why you trying to pay your love on the regular? I'm talking slick back, kick back, gang sipping 40s.
So if you're writing a song and you feel like the energy is dipping a little bit, try changing up the vocal rhythm. It is such a great way to create that variation even within a verse. And as I said a million times, variation is what keeps the song interesting and exciting for your listeners. The next point is that there's contrast in the way that the syllables are stressed in the pre-chorus. So we talked a lot about stresses in this song, and I think that this one is really, really important. First, we have 2 lines in this section. It's the only section of the song that has 2 lines, and on top of that, the stressed syllables are 6 and 5. It's the only part of the song that any line has more than 4 syllables, so that contrast in and of itself is something that helps make it stand out. But what's really exciting about this part is that every single syllable is stressed. It's the only part in the song that this happens, and when you do that, it draws a lot of attention to it. It's almost like you are putting a spotlight right on this phrase and saying, listen to this, listen to every single word, because every single word is important. So I want you to hear the difference just on how stressing every syllable makes. So if we only have 3 stressed syllables, playing games to avoid the depression, that gives a completely different feel than we play games of love to avoid the depression. You hear that in the second example, it's like every single syllable is important. So if you have a section in your song where you could literally, if you were writing out the lyrics, put a clap emoji in between each word, you definitely would want to try doing something like this where every single syllable is stressed, because it is going to bring a lot of attention and focus to that one specific part in your song. That's all I got for you today. Thank you so much for tuning in. I really appreciate it. I hope that you enjoyed this video, and if you did, it would help me out so much if you can like, subscribe, and comment below. I would love to hear your thoughts on this video. And also make sure you hit that notification bell, because next week we are going to be going over the top songs in 2020. So make sure that you don't miss it.